Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1980, three-way race. Carter going for the second term. Can he get it done? Let's find that out right now. Now we're going to start off with the incumbent party, and that is the Democratic Party. The incumbent president, Jimmy Carter of Georgia, elected in a squeaker in 1976 for his presidency. Not all that successful, but nonetheless, he is attempting to win renomination for a second term, but he's facing some opposition from, most notably, Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, but also from the governor of California, Jerry Brown, and Cliff Finch of Mississippi. At the end of the day, it is going to be Carter who receives the nomination for a second term, and he's going to bring back Walter Mondale, his vice president from Minnesota, as his running mate. Now that we have our Democratic ticket of Carter and Mondale, let's go to the Republicans. Now for the Republicans, they're rebounding from the Watergate scandal of 1972 to 74, and their own candidates put themselves up for nomination, and those people are Ronald Reagan of California, George Herbert Walker Bush of Texas, Congressman John B. Anderson of Illinois, Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee, Phil Crane, a congressman from Illinois, John Connally of Texas, Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, the 1976 vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, Bob Fernandez of California, Harold Stassen of Minnesota, Senator Lady Pressler of South Dakota, and Senator Laurel Wicker from Connecticut, Laurel Wicker. At the end of the day, it is going to be Ronald Reagan, the leader of the party's conservative wing, who receives the Republican nomination, and he's going to bring along for the ride George Herbert Walker Bush of Texas as his vice president. Now that we have our Republican ticket of Reagan and Bush, let's talk about John B. Anderson's campaign. Now, John B. Anderson, after being defeated in the Republican primaries, he was a congressman from Illinois, he decides to enter the election as an independent. He was campaigning as a moderate alternative to Reagan's conservatism, but however, his campaign ended up primarily appealing to frustrated anti-Carter voters, and his support progressively evaporated through the campaign season as his supporters were pulled away by both Carter and Reagan. Now, Anderson is going to name Patrick Lucey, a former Democrat governor of Wisconsin, and at the time the ambassador to Mexico, as his running mates. Now that we have our Democratic ticket of Carter and Mondale, our Republican ticket of Reagan and Bush, and our independent ticket of Anderson and Lucey, let's hit the campaign trail and let's see who's going to win this thing. Now, under federal election laws, Carter and Reagan received $29.4 million each, and Anderson was given a limit of $18.5 million with private fundraising allowed for him only. They were not allowed to spend any other money than that. Carter and Reagan each spent about $15 million on TV ads, and Anderson spent under $2 million. Now, in total, Reagan ended up spending $29.2 million, Carter $29.4 million, and Anderson $17.6 million. Partially because Anderson didn't get FEC money until after the election had concluded. Now, some consider the 1980 election a realigning election, reaching a climate of confrontation practically not seen since 1932. Reagan's supporters praised him for running a campaign of upbeat optimism, kind of much like FDR did back in 1932. David Frum says Carter ran an attack-based campaign based on despair and pessimism, which cost him the election. Carter emphasized his record as a peacemaker and said Reagan's election would threaten civil rights and social programs that stretch back to the New Deal. Now, Reagan's platform also emphasized the importance of peace as well as a prepared self-defense. Now, immediately after the primaries had concluded, a Gallup poll held that Reagan was ahead with 58% of voters upset by Carter's handling of the presidency. One analysis of the election has suggested that both Carter and Reagan were perceived negatively by a majority of the electorate. While the three leading candidates were religious Christians, Carter had the most support of evangelical Christians according to a Gallup poll. However, in the end, Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority lobbying group is credited with giving Reagan 2/3 of the white evangelical vote. According to Carter, quote, that autumn, a group headed by Jerry Falwell purchased $10 million in commercials on Southern radio and TV to brand me as a traitor to the South and no longer a Christian. Now, the election of 1980 was a key turning point in American politics. It signaled the new electoral power of the suburbs and the Sun Belt. Reagan's success as a conservative would initiate a realigning of the parties as liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats would either leave politics or change party affiliations through the 1980s and 1990s to leave the parties much more ideologically polarized. While during Barry Goldwater's 1964 campaign, many voters saw his warnings about a too powerful government as hyperbolic, and only 30% of the electorate agreed that government was too powerful. By 1980, a majority of Americans believed that government held too much power. So, really shows that conservatism on the rise. Since Barry Goldwater's campaign for the presidency in '64. Now, Reagan promised a restoration of the nation's military strength. At the same time, 60% of Americans polled felt defense spending was too low. Now, Reagan also promised an end to trust me government and to restore economic health by implementing a supply-side economic policy. Through the Carter administration, the United States still going through that decade, the 1970s, of stagflation. Stagnant economy, high inflation. Now, Reagan promised a balanced budget within 3 years, accompanied by a 30% reduction in tax rates over these same years. Now, with respect to the economy, Reagan famously said, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his. Reagan also criticized the windfall profit tax that Carter and Congress enacted that year in regards to domestic oil production and promised to attempt to repeal it as president. The tax was not a tax on profits, but on the difference between the price control mandated price and the market price. Now, on the issue of women's rights, there was much division, with many feminists frustrated with Carter, the only candidate who supported the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment has been proposed for many years, and basically, women have to be treated in the same equal manner as men. After a bitter convention fight between Republican feminists and anti-feminists, the Republican Party dropped their 40-year endorsement of the ERA. Reagan, however, announced his dedication to women's rights and his intention to, if elected, appoint women to his cabinet and the first female justice to the Supreme Court. He also pledged to work with all 50 state governors to combat discrimination against women and to equalize federal laws as an alternative to the ERA. The ERA, by the way, has never passed. It was never ratified, actually. Reagan was convinced to give an endorsement of women's rights in his nomination acceptance speech. Now, Carter was criticized by his own aides for not having a grand plan for the recovery of the economy, nor did he ever make any campaign promises. He often criticized Reagan's economic recovery plan, but did not create one of his own in response. And also during the election, the Iran hostage crisis was taking place, and this didn't bode really well for Carter. The Iran hostage crisis began in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iranians stormed the American embassy in the capital Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. At this point, a republic had been created in Iraq with the supreme leader Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and they demanded the return of the Shah to Iran to face charges. Now, eventually, the Shah would be forced to flee to Egypt, where he would die. But anyway, this went on for 444 days. And it wasn't until the beginning of the new presidential term, January 20th, 1981, after one failed rescue attempt already, the hostages would be set free. But who is the president on January 20th of 1981? We'll find that out in the results right now. And that person is going to be Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and the Republicans winning in a landslide, 489 electoral votes to 49 for Carter and the Republicans. And the Democrats, excuse me. Now, 44 states are going to vote Republican, and they're going to vote for Reagan. The states of Minnesota, Georgia, West Virginia, Hawaii, Maryland, and Rhode Island, along with Washington, D.C., are going to vote for Jimmy Carter. They're going to vote Democratic. Now, John B. Anderson and his independent campaign did not receive any electoral votes, but in terms of the popular vote, 50.7% of the popular vote goes to Reagan and the Republicans, 41% goes to Carter and the Democrats, while 6.6% goes to that independent third-party campaign of John B. Anderson and Patrick Lucey. Now, Reagan is the oldest president in American history. He took office at the age of 69. By the way, Teddy Roosevelt is the youngest president in American history, taking office at the age of 42. And Reagan is going to serve out his first term. He's actually going to survive an assassination attempt 2 months into his presidency. And he's going to run for a second term in the election of 1984, which we'll talk about next time. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, go ahead and watch those if you want. And with that, we will see you next time at the election of 1984.